So welcome everybody. You'll note I've not taken my coat off. Apologies. I'd like to say this is our attempt at environmental sustainability, but I'm not quite sure if that is true. It is a bit chilly. So I'm going to speak only briefly, and actually apart from the title I only have one slide, because this is really first and foremost an opportunity for you to ask us questions or to communicate things to us. And I'm joined by not quite all, but most of the senior leadership team, who I'll introduce in a couple of minutes. So let me just make a few comments at the outset. It does still feel like we are in an environment of change and uncertainty. We have a new government, of course, but Brexit, dare hesitate to remind you, is not very far away, and there are a number of things affecting the sector. We also have quite a lot of internal change that we've been going through and will go through, and we know from your feedback that that is something that we need to do better at managing. Having said that, we're just finalising the report called our Annual Stocktake Report, which comments on our achievements over the past year. It's reviewed at the Accountability Conference by our Board of Governors, and it looks at every one of the major areas that we consider important and how we've done against how we said we would do. And I'm certainly not going to do that, go through all of that. There are a few areas where we've done okay, but not as well as we wanted to. Research grant income is up, but not as much as we wanted. Student satisfaction is up, but not as much as we wanted. But I do just want to highlight the diversity of some of the achievements. You will have seen, no doubt, on Oxford Road that we were the University of the Year for graduate employability. We remain the most popular university for undergraduate applications, with extremely strong applications from home and overseas. We've initiated the groundbreaking Student Mental Health Centre together with other universities in Greater Manchester. Jodrell Bank got World Heritage status. We were ranked top in Europe in the Times Higher Sustainable Development Goals. We've had huge successes in a number of research areas, and just to highlight one, in cancer, nearly £50 million in major grants all together within about a month, half of which £25 million for the new building. Our staff have gone on to achieve many, many things, and I'll only highlight one area which is particularly notable. 4 of our staff elected to the British Academy in Humanities and 13 to the Academy of Social Sciences, the highest numbers we've ever had. I'm due to launch something fabulous called Digital Collections later this week, and I was shown a fabulous research project in John Rylands last night on applying scientific approaches to understanding ancient history. And then, of course, you will have seen many more green spaces on our campus. A lot still to do, but an awful lot of successes as well. And of course, one of the things we've spent a lot of time on over the past year is our vision and strategic plan. And I'm pleased that I hope many of you have been able to contribute to it. We've consulted with over 4,000 staff, students, alumni and stakeholders in developing the plan. In some senses, it maintains a stability and a continuity because we still have our 3 core themes of research and discovery, teaching and learning, and social responsibility. We've put at that, the heart of it, our people, our values, and you'll notice students no longer feature on teaching and learning, and that's because somebody rather observantly said, but aren't students our people anyway? They're not separate. We agreed that they were, so they come under our people. But at the same time, there are quite a few new initiatives and ideas, and particularly innovation, civic engagement, and global influence that go around the sides. We're now developing more detailed plans for each of these themes, and these will be distributed shortly for people to comment on. I do want to highlight a couple of things. Firstly, our people, our values. Hopefully you will have seen that in various fora we've launched an invitation for you to tell us about ways in which you can suggest that we or you could reduce workload, improve well-being. There is no doubt many surveys and stories, both internally and across the sector, of concerns about workload. And we all have to think about ways that we can reduce that, either by doing things more efficiently or by not replicating, or the simple things that many of us can do. Don't do reply all on an email unless you absolutely have to. But we're inviting comments, and I know Patrick's received quite a few already, and I'm sure he'd be happy to comment on it. But just to finish, it is an interesting time. The new government has repeatedly committed to additional funding for the North of England and additional funding for research and innovation. And I've pushed back very hard because that's quite often called science and innovation. Government use that as shorthand for research. So they do mean include creative, social sciences, business studies, and so on. And the Minister for University Science and Innovation was here on Friday, very, very positively, and again reiterated the commitment. The other thing we discussed, which I think this government is committed to, is reducing what we might call bureaucracy. There is no doubt we are more accountable, we are more regulated than we have ever been, and that seems to be increasing frequently. And sometimes it's difficult to see where that adds value to what we do. So there is quite a significant pushback on that. I'm not holding out too many hopes just yet, but we are optimistic that we may be able to say some of these things being asked of us are absolutely right and we should be doing them. Some of them, it's not easy to see the value given the workload and the time it takes to respond to each of these. So what we're going to do in a moment is to invite you to ask questions. You can do so simply by putting up your hand and just say your name. You can also do it by going to the website, slido.com, and entering hashtag SLT2020 and emailing a question. Just put your name on it if you didn't want to put your hand up. And either way, we'll try to answer them. So let me just introduce my colleagues. Patrick?
Hello, I'm Patrick Hackett. I'm the Registrar, Secretary and COO.
I'm Karen Heaton. I'm the Director of HR.
I'm Martin Schroeder. I'm Dean of the Faculty of Science and Engineering.
Hello, I'm April McMahon. I'm Vice President for Teaching, Learning and Students.
Colette Fagan, Vice President for Research and Discovery.
Nalin Thakur, Vice President for Social Responsibility.
Can you hear them all? Yes, good, good. And can I give apologies from... Oh, sorry, David. You were hiding.
Last but not least, David Souter, Interim Director of Finance. Good afternoon.
And apologies from Graham Lord, who is in London visiting foreign dignitaries, Keith Brown and Luke Georgia, who are both unwell and we hope are recovering. So, who would like to ask the first questions? Somebody's got to be brave. Thank you.
Of the university's credit rating by Moody, particularly with respect to Manchester is particularly vulnerable to a decline in research income given our high expenditure in that area.
Yes, I'll let David answer in a moment, but let me give you some comments. I went through the original credit rating with Moody's, and I think given we're on an open forum, I'll only say it is a bizarre experience. Research income is a particularly unusual thing to note in a credit rating because research loses us money. So actually, if we had a lot less research income, we'd be financially an awful lot better off and therefore have a better credit rating, which demonstrates perhaps not a full understanding of the finances. But anyway, not that we want reduced research income. The Moody's downgrading, which applied to quite a number of universities, was, I think, a reflection of uncertainties in the sector. And I didn't go through all of these, but the Augur review, which is still possibly mulling around in the background, possibly a reduction in fees, may or may not be made up by government, additional costs of pensions, that's going to be huge. Just the known changes will be not far short of £10 million extra for us. In terms of competition, we're doing very well, but they have recognised that. But David, you were involved in those discussions. Do you want to add to it?
Yes, happy to do that. Thanks for the question. So it's worth pointing out that the Moody's credit rating for universities was largely driven by taking a more negative view of UK government debt. So Moody's downgraded all government borrowing by 1 point. As a result of that, and due to nothing to do with the sector, the rating for all other bonds which are linked to government debt was also downgraded. So that happened essentially because of their view about the value of UK government debt. So that's one important point to note. The other is that their rating was done before we'd announced our results for last financial year. Strangely, it was about a week before, but that was just the timing when they review the pricing for government debt. The fact that we announced better results than the previous year, literally within a week, didn't within their rules, allow them to change their view about our rating. It may affect their view when they review it at the next opportunity, which will be in April or May later on this year. But we did take the opportunity in December to have a meeting with two of their representatives, senior folk in finance, to talk through their process and for us to talk through with them our results and our strategy for the next few years. So we understand now how we would need to present our plans financially and for the overall strategic plan to them to optimize the chance that they will improve their rating. So we're aiming to do that, aiming towards the next rating update, which will be in April or May, or failing that in the 6 months after that, later towards the end of 2020. So I think those are all relevant points. So it's not the fact that we perform particularly badly or that we're performing much worse than other universities. All the universities that they rate experience the same downgrade.
So the only thing I would just add is that the Moody's rating really only matters if you want to borrow a significant sum of money, because it determines the rate. And we're not planning at the moment to borrow a significant sum of money. But thank you. Yes, Mike. Down at the front.
Thank you. So, Mike Garrett from Physics and Astronomy, Jodrell Bank Centre for Astrophysics. My question relates also to research funding and also Brexit. I know that you in particular, Nancy, have been advising the government on research funding post-Brexit. It's not clear, and maybe you can say something about this, whether there will be opportunities for the UK in Horizon Europe, for example, the next framework programme or future ERCs. And if that's not the case, do you expect that there may be some sort of national equivalent that would fund individual awards and research infrastructure?
So I'll see if Colette wants to add to this in a minute, but I can't tell you a great deal more other than, and of course, whether we are part of either ERC or Horizon funding is not entirely within our gift. That's the decision of Europe as well as us. There is certainly a strong will that we should be among British parliamentarians, with a backup that another fund would be formed if we were not. And you heard, in spite of rumours in the press, the Prime Minister very clearly saying we want to be part of Erasmus+. So the will is there, certainly. They would very much like to be part of European funding. If it isn't possible, or if the conditions that are applied in order to make that happen are deemed too difficult to meet, the backup is there is another fund, and of course there's been a big report on this from Adrian Smith and Graham Reid arguing how that could work. So I think there is a strong recognition of the value of European and wider international collaboration. Did you want to add anything, Colette?
Only to add that there will be a bit of a hiatus, even if we are kept in. Whether it's a hiatus in designing the current programme, we're not able to shape it in the same way. And there could be a hiatus in terms of being able back into the programme as it shapes up in Horizon. So that's a reality even before we get into the uncertainty of what's on the table at what stage in the next months of negotiation around withdrawal. Nancy referred to the report that has been commissioned and is out in public domain. Graham Reid was one of the authors, where there was very close consultation with the sector and particularly with the Russell Group on what would help us as a springboard if everything fell over in Europe. And that is still on the table. I think it's implicit and explicit in many of the statements about how R&D investment and investment in different parts of the UK are going to be part of the economic build going forward. But we still have to look at the just judgments and budget setting in terms of what comes into the R&D budget relative to other decisions which are going to be taken elsewhere. So it's still uncertain, but very positive language. It's translating it into cash and practice we have to watch.
From Jodrell Banks' perspective, the Minister, when he was here, actually in the National Graphene Institute, did an interview for television news, and it was all about space. So that's obviously high on their agenda. Questions? Yes, one towards the back.
Oh, hello. My name's Cardi Kamara. I work in international student recruitment. It's a question really about progress on achieving the targets around increasing the number of BAME staff at senior levels, at management level and leadership level, how you feel, how you think that's going, and whether we're actually being ambitious enough as a university.
So I think Nalin will comment on that. It's around the percentage of BAME staff in senior positions. No, we're not where we need to be. There's absolutely no doubt we're not where we need to be. And as a result of that, there is a pay gap. We're one of very few organisations that report it. It's about 10% pay gap. And that's not that people are paid less for doing the same job. It's that there aren't as many in senior jobs. There's a gap, of course, for gender as well. Nalin, I know you're developing quite a lot of plans in this area.
Yeah, sure. If you look at what progress we've made over the last 5 years, then there's been very little change. And there's no point doing the same thing over and over again, because we'll just fail over and over again. So what we're doing together with Patrick and Karen is really looking at what is effective, where are we, what are the gaps in what we do, and how can we do things differently that will make real difference. So we are reviewing our strategy completely. We are considering having an external expert audit of our processes. So we're taking basically root and branch review of how we do things in this area. Now, even if we put in changes under a new strategy, the changes will take a while to sort of feed through into the numbers. So that's effectively a lag indicator, the number change, how people are progressing. But I can assure you we will change things that will mean that this is a top priority for all of us, that managers take this seriously, and that our processes are effective.
Thank you.
Hi, Neil Chamberlain, Staff Learning and Development. Regarding the vision and strategic plan, what role do you see our leaders and managers having in bringing this to life with their people?
And I think I'll ask perhaps Patrick and Karen to comment on this in a second, but it's a slightly loaded question because, as you know, we've instigated a lot of training and support and mentoring for leaders and managers, Inspiring Leaders Programme. I think I went to the 25th cohort last week. I'm probably going to the 26th this week, leading at Manchester and managing at Manchester. And that's a recognition that we have not done enough with people who are not necessarily heads of huge parts of the university, but nevertheless have significant leadership and management responsibilities and sometimes budgetary responsibility.
There's two things for me. One is our responsibilities as role models. And if we think about our values, as we've re-established them in our people and our values as part of our new strategic plan, I think our first responsibility is to role model those values. I think our second responsibility is to ensure that best practice is how we all conduct our activities, and that we encourage colleagues to call out bad behaviour, bad practice, where that might be happening in the university. So I think we have a dual responsibility.
Just to add a couple of points from me, I think it's really important, building on what Patrick's just said, to keep reinforcing the values through the learning opportunities that we present as well, and that we need to make sure that this isn't just a one-off event. There was so much involvement from the staff in producing the strategy and contributing into it that we need to make sure that continues, the engagement continues, and we bring it to life. So we have to make sure that leaders are in a place where they can translate what that means for an individual in their job on a day-to-day basis.
Okay. Next question. Must have another one. Yes, there's one over there. Gillian, I think. Yes.
Mine is about
Gillian
well-being.
Haddock,
Gillian
School of
Haddock.
Health Sciences.
Psychology and mental health. So my question, observation, reflection is about, relates to well-being, I think, and workload. And the question I'm posing is, can we explore options to consider having more flexible career options, paths, promotion criteria with regard to our staff? For example, many of our R&T staff feel very pressured to obtain grant money, quite rightly, but there is a feeling that that sometimes has to be prioritised over other activities, so that we're ending up with a slightly divergent staff grouping, those that are solely teaching focused and those that are research and teaching focused, which can result in some of our R&T teaching staff not doing some of the great things that we want them to, which is to lead great, fantastic courses and make them research active and make the teaching really research active. Yeah. So we're in danger of having a missing middle of our academics.
Yeah, we are.
Those that do fantastic PGR supervision, those that produce great papers, but actually it's not necessary to have a load of external money to fund that. Can we explore how we can make our promotion criteria fit everybody so that all the activities are equally valued? So, for example, putting cash equivalents on being a course director of a course, for example, or bringing in PGR supervision so that it's equivalent to obtaining a grant, for example, so that we're giving a more balanced career pathway for different people. Similarly, for technical staff who have an academic career, they don't always fit that neatly into our two main career pathways at the moment.
Yeah. It's timely you should raise this. We were just talking this morning about the fact that many of our staff don't fit the standard teaching and or research, and April might want to say something about this, maybe Martin as a dean. Personally, and I agree with many of your comments, I'm personally not keen on cash equivalents. I think we get into, this is worth X thousand and that's only worth 200 and that's what, you get into. Of course, all of the things we do are very time consuming. But what we've got to get across is we can't expect everybody to do everything. It's just not possible. Or to do it to the level that some do. I'm not keen on having the divide, and I know April isn't, between staff who do research and staff who do teaching, because the best academic staff do both where possible. But I don't know, you express strong views about this, April.
Yes, I'm being fingered for expressing strong views about things. I'm very happy.
Just go a bit close to the microphone, if you can.
I think that, I mean, I'm all for parity of esteem, but it shouldn't just be about the difference between education and research. It's also, and we were talking about this morning, it's around professional practice. We've got so many colleagues who are professional practitioners, and I don't think that we're sufficiently clear yet about where that sits. I also don't think, and this is probably letting myself in for a bit of a minefield coming, but I don't think we're clear enough about what scholarship really means. And, you know, Colette and I are doing a bit of work at the moment, just looking at academic leave, for instance, and what that should look like for staff on different types of contracts. It's a way in the future, but I do think that we should be looking at how we can allow for flexibility across people's career period as well, because there may be a period where, for very good reasons, teaching is at the top of your agenda. And there may be other periods where research is at the top of your agenda. Are we really being as smart as we can be, saying that every time you move from one to the other, we've got to do a contract change? There have to be different ways.
Did you want to ask something, Colette? And then I'll ask Martin as our representative dean.
I'm adding this in the context of working with Kirsty Boches and Kay, who's in the room, and a number of others, to review our promotions criteria, which were revised and went through Senate couple of years ago, where, interestingly, we don't refer to teaching and scholarship, we refer to RT or R&T as the three pathways through. And I'm also making these comments prefaced by having developed guidelines when I was in humanities and chairing some of the promotions committees there. There's quite a lot of local scope, not to go off and have a rogue way of promoting people, but in terms of how you measure contribution in a particular field, because we look at domains. Now, if you've got an area where there's a strong emphasis on research income, I would want to pick, and I know where some of it comes from but not all, and to see how this is translated into the decision-making of the promotions committee.
Okay. So Martin's our nominated dean today.
Oh, thank you very much. You raise very important points. I agree with what colleagues have just said, but I just build on that. I mean, one of the issues you see in a promotions panel is this parity of esteem. I think we've worked very, very hard to promote teaching, give it the reward that it deserves, because quite clearly, financially and in every way, teaching is extremely important. It is vital to the university. So I would say, and I guess I would say this, wouldn't I, because I'm the dean, I think we've done a lot of very good work in promoting teaching within the faculties. But I think there's another issue, and that goes back to workload and well-being. We are doing a lot of work on workload models or working out what people are actually doing on a day-to-day basis. And I think there is evidence that some academics do far too much administration and generate workload for themselves, trying to be perfect. So most academics are perfectionists, so if you ask them to do something, they will do it to perfection and spend many hours doing it, when in fact the aim was only to do that job such that it gets done rather than to the nth level. And I think that's something we're currently focusing on in reducing the workload for academic staff.
Perfect is said to be the enemy of good. Other questions? Beresford?
Thank you. Beresford Edwards from the Main Library. Are there any plans to revisit the remit of the works to target roles at grade 5 and above?
Sorry, I didn't...
Currently, the works is an initiative that...
The works? Yes.
It's, currently, its remit is, it targets roles at grades 1 to 4 or 5, I believe. Which basically, obviously, doesn't address the underrepresentation of BAME and BAME staff at grades 6 and above.
I don't know if Nalin wants to or Karen wants to comment on that, but that was done not really about equality, diversity and inclusion. It was more about long-term unemployed, and people at grades, lower grades feature predominantly in long-term unemployment. And I still think there's a role for that. I'm not sure, we might have other ways of doing it, but I'm not sure the works would be the way I would address diversity at higher grades. But Nalin, do you want to say anything about it?
No, I think I would not put works scheme as something that was designed to increase diversity. I think it was really, and I'm looking at Julian here, really targeted at the unemployed and in general. But and it's not necessarily the best way to sort of bring in people, I think.
But having said that, there is an issue with higher grade staff, particularly in professional services, where diversity is poor. And I think, and I know Will, Patrick's successor, brought in a requirement to advertise externally for these roles, simply because if you only advertise internally, you'll just perpetuate. And so there was an attempt to go externally on it.
I think in PS we have an issue about representation of BAME staff generally across. I mean, if you look at all grades, it's something like 8%, and if you look at our local population, BAME representation is about 27%, 25%, something like that. So they are very much underrepresented, and it is something we're looking at and saying, how do we increase this? But I'm not sure the works is the answer. But it's an interesting suggestion, and I think we can look at that, but it wasn't primarily designed for that.
Else? Yes.
Sandra Taylor from Manchester Institute of Biotechnology. I mean, just kind of a little bit leading on from that question, but in terms of for PS and technical staff, when we're looking at career development opportunities and opportunities to progress, there isn't a very clear structure, as in any promotion system or clear way how you'd go about that. So I don't know what leadership team's thoughts are on that, but I had noticed the job descriptions are extremely prescriptive now. So when you're looking to change fields, unless you're already doing that job, it's quite hard to get the experience.
Patrick, do you want to answer?
Actually, I nearly said that in relation to Beresford's earlier question. We've talked about this a lot within professional services leadership team, and we recognise that the minimum requirements that we set for many of the more senior roles in professional services are really quite demanding, and they don't provide opportunities for individuals to maybe be 80% ready for the next step in their career. We're expecting them to be 100% plus. And that's something we are going to review, because we think that could well unlock opportunities for individuals that they wouldn't otherwise have had. So that's a really good point you've made.
But I think it's also fair to say that we've got more specific and more technical about some of the roles. And if you look back 20 years ago, the generalist professional support services moved from very different functions, but they're now highly professionalised and highly developed, and maybe too much so. Any more? Julian's got another one.
Completely unrelated to my previous one. I became aware recently that we had a lot of outstanding contracts with external organisations with regard to our research, and that they were causing not considerable but substantial problems in terms of getting research grants going, getting on with it, and delaying things. And I just wondered whether some review or thought could be gone into supporting the contracts team in being able to deliver on the contracts more quickly. Because I don't think it's that they're not very good. They are excellent from what I understand, but quite under-resourced. But in my division alone, there were 18 contracts that were not set up going back over 18 months, which you can understand in terms of us getting the money in, that causes substantial problems. But it's also caused problems with external agencies that we're collaborating with, some of which may be Global Health Partners, which has caused some substantial issues.
I think Colette will answer that. Maybe it's my optimism, but I thought when you started with outstanding, you were going to say extremely good, but actually you're not. You're saying delayed. This is an issue. I mean, a number of contracts have just escalated, and the complexity of them. And Martin wants to say something as well, but Colette first.
You go first, Colette.
Yes, we need more resource in the contracts team. I know that Patrick and Andrew Walsh, who leads the directorate, are looking at resourcing and enhancing resource. And it's becoming a whole different world. We want more contracts. The contracts are becoming more complicated because we're doing more partnerships, both nationally and internationally across the piece. And so I see it as a critical part of what we need if we're going to deliver on our research strategy.
Yeah, Martin, you wanted to add to it?
Yes, I think from my perspective, several of these have come onto my desk where contracts have been delayed, and the academic, the PI is getting frustrated, and even the company is getting very frustrated. My observation is that over the last 5 years, negotiation of contracts has become much, much more complex. Industries are playing more hardball, and the university is also seeking to gain the appropriate overheads, and companies are less willing to negotiate upwards. They, of course, wish to negotiate downwards. And if, for example, you have an existing contract and the next contract comes with that same company, it becomes very difficult, if our criteria have changed, to actually get that contract through in a timely way. For example, just to give you a sense of this, there are contracts, one particular one that took over 10 months to finalize, And the sticking point was the company were requiring us to accept an infinite liability if we broke some confidentiality agreement. And we could not agree to that.
Yeah, this is an important issue, and I know Andrew's going to want to say a word in a moment, Andrew.
Or he might not want to.
But the answer is going to be more complicated than just providing more resource to this. You know, we have wider challenges around resource availability, as we all know, in various parts of the university. And our focus is going to have to be on finding new ways of doing things rather than simply providing more resource. But Andrew, with that introduction, I know you'd like to say something about the work that's been ongoing with the team over the past 12 months.
So thank you, Patrick. Yes.
Andrew Walsh,
Paul Townsend,
Director.
BMH, is also eager to say something on the topic as Associate Dean for Business Engagement in the faculty. Clearly, it's something that's across his desk as well. So, as Patrick has said, you know, for some time now, we've been in an ongoing discussion about this as an issue. As Martin says, it's not. Although partly it's driven by volume, it's typically driven by complexity, both in terms of how contracts are set up as we move towards larger, more collaborative, more complicated research projects, more and more overseas organizations involved in the mix. So we're looking at different jurisdictions and different legal and insurance issues around that. Impact of things like GDPR, impact of export controls, impact of our own agenda and strategy around price and cost recovery. All have that impact. So we're looking at the business process, the workflows involved, the communications involved in terms of internal understanding, but ultimately also at resources, which is part of that picture. But as Patrick said, as we move towards more and more scale, there will undoubtedly be more efficient and more effective ways of working that we can operate with when we've grown to a level to cope with our overall portfolio. We've done some work over this year in terms of reviewing our processes. I'm working with Russell Group equivalents, looking at their own teams in the sector, and we're doing that work as we speak. In fact, there's a meeting with Health Sciences being set up at the moment to address some of those issues in the school, so it's very timely.
Okay.
I'll just hand over to Paul, who's
All right.
crowding
Wishing
in.
you hadn't asked now, Julian. Anybody else want to?
Also,
Paul Townsend.
Oh, hello.
Vice Dean for
Sorry.
Business
Paul
Engagement.
Townsend, Associate Dean for Business Engagement in FBMH. I completely agree with everything you say, and I agree with you, Patrick, in terms of being a perfectionist can add to the issue. And we do have processes, and we have great processes, and if they are followed accurately, we're much more efficient. When we don't follow those processes, which is absolutely fine, and I love it when academics, I'm an academic myself, and we can discuss with the company, but we should not be discussing terms and conditions of a contract, costings, recovery, etc., because all that does is really hinder where we go, and it means we have to start again. So I'd urge colleagues to talk to the PS staff to help us and to help in terms of how to get a contract up and running from the beginning very smoothly.
Okay, so we've got some questions come through. First one from Kate, and I'm going to pronounce this wrongly, so I won't try to. Hundreds of contributions made by staff last year via the Hive ideas for staff benefits like buying extra holidays, working from home. We've had no updates on how this is going. Is it being reviewed and considered? Yes and yes. Of course, for some staff, there are severe restrictions on that. You know, you have to, there are times when you have to be here and others where it's more easily flexible. But as part of the well-being, it's under consideration. I don't know if you want to...
Yeah. There were actually a total of 40 suggestions, so thank you to those who made those suggestions. They are welcome, and there were some that were just not workable, like reducing the working week down to 4 days, and some great suggestion of bringing your pet to work, which I would personally love, but and I'm sure some of you would too, but if everybody brought their animal to work, it would be a little bit chaotic. But nevertheless, there were some very sensible and serious suggestions that were put forward. And so we have been doing some work in this area to look at what actually flexible working really means. And we've set up a flexible workers network. We've done some manager training because one of the issues was around a lack of consistency in the way that our policy was being applied across the university. So we've run awareness sessions for over 80 managers, We've developed some more guidance to help to try and equalise and balance the approach out across the university. But we are looking at what more could we actually do, but putting some rules around that, because not everybody can work from home, because jobs don't always lend themselves to that. But also we are still looking at how we might set up a framework for people who do want to purchase additional holidays and anything else we want to introduce under that flexible benefit banner.
Okay. Is there any update on the university's thinking on continued investment in fossil fuel companies or other extractive industries from Oliver Taylor? Yes. Nalin.
Yes, there is. We will be putting out a draft policy for consultation by all staff and students. And the basis of the revised draft policy is that we are looking at not just disinvesting in fossil fuel companies, but decarbonizing our total portfolio of investments. So this work, how does this work? You look at carbon intensity of every company you invest in, and that's basically carbon emission per unit of industrial activity, and we're working with our managers to sort of define that more accurately. If you disinvest from fossil fuel companies, you will get rid of investment in fossil fuel reserves, but in terms of emissions, you reduce the emissions by 15%. That's what you're targeting, essentially. You're not investing in companies that contribute 15% of our emissions directly. Most of the emissions that arise from fossil fuels is what everybody else uses, their Scope 3 emissions, so heavy industry and so on. So instead of targeting those companies, instead of targeting just the fossil fuel companies, what we're saying is we will disinvest in companies that are heavy emitters of carbon dioxide. So it is a much better approach, it's a much more comprehensive approach, and it will reduce our investment in companies that are big emitters. In the course of that progressive decarbonization, we will lose all our fossil fuel investment anyway, because they are one of the bigger ones. But we will also lose investment in the sort of more heavy industries that are polluters.
So, I mean, we think this is much more radical than any other university has done, and actually much fairer, because we're not just picking on those that provide the fuel, but it's the whole system that uses it. How do you justify using a Sports Direct business model for staff employment? Well, obviously the first thing I would say is we absolutely do not have a Sports Direct business model for staff employment, but I think Patrick or Karen?
Yeah, I presume, Helen, you're not referring to all of us wearing sneakers and shorts and T-shirts. I take it from the question you're asking about 0 hours contracts, about fixed term contracts. Is that right? Versus permanent contracts. I think there's been a lot of debate about this. There have been a lot of figures and percentages used around this. And some of the problems we've got, I think, is that we're not clear about defining what we mean by some of these terms that we're using. So, for example, if we think about 0 hours contracts, there are claims that we use a great many 0 hours contracts in this university. And the answer is that we don't use a great many 0 hours contracts in this university. The only time we use them is in very specific circumstances. So, for example, if we have students who we use as workers for open days events, as ambassadors on behalf of the university, we will use a 0 hours contract. Even in that case, though, even in that instance, we will guarantee that student a minimum number of hours. And for some of our lecturers where we use what's called a 0 hours contract, we don't use it as a 0 hours contract. We guarantee a minimum number of hours. And it's sometimes difficult to get this across in simplistic fashion. And so it's helpful that you're asking us the question so that we can provide more information to help you understand the circumstances in which this type of contract is used. The same is true for fixed term contracts. Where we use fixed term contracts is where in many cases, is where we have limited funding, fixed term funding associated with that role. We sometimes use them as well in professional services where the role itself is fixed term because it's related to a project or it's related to an area where there will be a restructure. I hope that's helpful. And Helen, if you want to ask us a more specific question about it, then we'd be happy to try and answer as well.
Can I just add to that, part of your employment is all the policies and procedures that go around you. And we have some excellent policies and procedures that are often cited nationally as leading edge. And also all the other terms and conditions of employment, all the benefit package that goes around that, means that we are far from being anything like a sports direct employment model.
By the way, if those people who either have asked questions or put them on here feel we haven't answered them, do come back again. Is there any update on the redevelopment of the Sackville Street building and is ML Main Library? Main Library. Okay, Sackville Street, yeah, let me answer that. So some of you may know, or hopefully you know, as we vacate the North Campus, we've taken a decision, the Board of Governors has taken a decision, we will not sell that site. We will retain the freehold. We were now quite well advanced in seeking a commercial partner in a joint venture to develop an innovation district. A district that we believe will greatly facilitate our research, our students, with employment opportunities, with study opportunities, with collaborations, and so on. That process is ongoing and it will take a little while. Sackville Street building is part of that. It is a listed building, so it will not be destroyed or damaged. I was quite concerned that it might pose something of a difficulty for the development. Actually, all the developers who've talked to us love Sackville Street building. Now, I can't tell you what it will be used for yet, because obviously that depends on who's chosen as the partner and how we develop the plans. But ideas that have been brought forward include, for example, startup space for small companies, something like the model that's used in some places, notably in New York and Boston, called Work, Live, Play, where there are working spaces, there's living spaces, there's hotel, there's recreational spaces. It is a massive building. Main Library, at the present time, we don't have the funding to deliver on it, but it is top of the list for as soon as we do.
And we do have ambitions, great ambitions for the Main Library. And Chris Pressler, our university librarian, along with Diana Hampson, are developing proposals for how we should envisage the library of the future. And so that will form part of our future estate master plan in due course. And maybe I should just mention, given that you've linked the two projects, there was obviously an intention that the dual library in Sackville Street would have been relocated or reconsidered as part of the refurbishment of the Main Library. Obviously that timing now has been disconnected, so again Chris and Diana are looking at how we make provision for the dual library in the meantime.
From Michelle, 1920 is the last year of the 6-year cycle for faculty peer review of teaching. Has it been a success and will it be continuing? You're fairly new here, April, but do you want to comment on that?
We have to have ways of supporting colleagues in developing their teaching practice. And having another colleague, and potentially students as well, giving you advice about what's working, what isn't working, is a fantastic way of doing that in a face-to-face setting. Whether we've got it exactly right in terms of the way that we're doing peer review at the moment, I think my main concern is whether we're being sufficiently consistent in the way that we're actually putting that kind of principle into practice. The shining light for me on this is that we've now got the Institute for Teaching and Learning with Judy Williams as director, which started at pretty much the time that I started here on the 1st of October. So this is one of the things that we're working on. We need to look at peer review of teaching, we need to look at student evaluations of teaching, and how we hear student voice and act on that, how we also use the fantastic resources that we've got here in terms of other colleagues' experience of teaching practice, and how we look at that sector-wide to make sure that we're getting the right good practice that we can share in different subjects. So yes, continuing in some way. Have we got it right? We need to just look at that a little bit more closely.
We haven't got any more questions on Slido. Any more questions from the audience, or you might think we haven't? Yes? Hang on, microphone.
Hi, Caroline Whitehan from Student Recruitment and International Development. Really, I think it's more of a point than a question, maybe.
That's right.
But it was just something that's come up in a couple of open meetings that I've been to, and it relates to the whole point around fixed-term contracts and how I think people are understanding that. And I think all I wanted to say is I understand what the university position is on using fixed-term contracts. I think some of the pushback and some of those questions around fixed-term contracts have very much, certainly from where I'm seeing it, around the current position we have with SEP, in that actually over the last 2 to 3 years, a huge proportion of positions are actually fixed-term contracts. So it's really just saying, no, for example, in my team, 2/3 of my team now are on fixed-term contracts, which would not have been the case in the past. So I really just wanted to say that as a way of in responding to those issues around the Sports Direct and where people might be seeing that.
That's a really fair comment around SEP, where it's a defined role, of course, and we can't manage the staff just by moving them. They are. But as a percentage of the total number of staff we have, it is actually tiny. The vast majority are on either cover, well, most are research or graduate teacher assistants, but it's a fair point you make.
Yeah, and really that's what I was alluding to when I talked about fixed-term contracts in relation to restructuring. I think SEP has taken a long time, and that's maybe exacerbated the situation somewhat. But our current strategy is to use fixed-term contracts only for as long as is necessary, rather than, for example, appointing people to permanent roles that we know within a short period of time could be made redundant. And we feel that would be wrong. And having the fixed-term contracts instead is the right strategy. But nevertheless, we completely accept that they should only be fixed-term for as short a period as is necessary.
It was very much not a positive or a negative comment. It was more
Indeed. No, we fully understand that.
It's fair. I'm going to ask Colette to comment on collaborative research across disciplines. Martin might want to add to that. And what are we doing about it? The answer is lots, so give a quick summary. And then I'm going to ask everybody to briefly answer what excites you most about the new strategic vision.
Okay, so interdisciplinary research is as much about collaboration within schools as well as cross-faculty, so we need to separate it from the organisational structure we live in. At Manchester, we have a portfolio. Our main drivers around interdisciplinary research where we are currently are our institutes, our beacons, and platforms such as Digital Futures and the new emerging one around Creative Manchester. So we have quite a few vehicles for bringing people together, getting them to rub their ideas up, develop and build teams. In the sector, I think we're in a good starting place. In the new strategy, we will be doing more of that in terms of building thick threads to get existing groups who are often interdisciplinary within the group working across each other and bringing others in who aren't necessarily primarily affiliated to an institute or a large research group. So that's what we're doing.
Okay, we've just got another one. This is the last one we're going to take, because then I'm going to ask for one sentence each on what excites you most. Some PS are driven, enjoy job and work, hard to progress, but career path is not always clear. Waiting for higher grades to retire or change. How to ensure fair promotion track for PS whilst not demotivating. Do you want to comment, Karen? I mean, it is a different structure to the academic promotion.
It's a very different structure, and roles have to exist for them to be considered to be promotion. We don't have the same route. Otherwise, everybody would be moving upwards all the time. So roles have to exist and have to be required. What we need to do is make sure that we are developing people. People have proper development plans that enable them, it goes back to what Patrick said earlier on, enable them to be in a position to capitalise when roles do emerge. So we can have people who are ready to take on those extra responsibilities.
Okay, one sentence each. Patrick, what excites you most about our new strategic vision? I'm going to assume that's vision and plan.
So for me, I'm really excited by the fact that our people and our values sit visually and in meaningful terms at the very heart of our new vision and strategic plan.
Karen?
It was the same for me. Our people, our values at the centre of our strategic plan and how I can contribute to making that real.
Martin?
Support for our people, make them more confident and resilient in terms of their well-being, workload and ability to deal with change.
Apart from the colour purple, I do like a bit of colour. It would need to be our opportunity to help more students from any background who can benefit from a Manchester education to come here and succeed.
Research and discovery, but also the links and increasing maturity in the interface of teaching and learning and social responsibility, which I think you'll see written through the documents.
Nalin?
I think it's about developing a more coherent narrative around our social responsibility and sort of looking at the sort of impact through everything we have on our society. So,
David?
The ambition for the staff as a whole and for the city and the region.
So for me, I hope we've tried to represent that each of the themes are not separate, but they're integrated into a whole. And that means not everybody's doing everything, but it does mean there's huge overlap. And we tried to represent that from the circles, that you can't separate research, innovation, teaching, social responsibility, and indeed, as has been said, our people are, in the end, what will make a difference and what will help us to deliver. And I think we're now about 1 minute from finishing time. So I'm going to close and say thank you all for coming. If there were questions you wanted to ask and didn't get a chance to ask them, do submit them to Jamie. Slido still. You can still do Slido. So we will answer them. But thank you all very much, and sorry it was a bit cold. Thank you.